thank you everybody for being here. Today is the October Customerville Coffee Break webinar. Today's topic is going to be talking about reaching the unreachable, a topic that's on a lot of people's minds right now. By now, you guys probably all know a lot about our Coffee Break webinar, but for those that don't, we're doing a series of monthly webinars, each one 20, 25 minutes long, all short and on the topic of customer experience. I'm Mark Mandel, and I'm here joined with my co-host, Max Israel, as always.
And guys, I'm Max Israel, and I'm Customerville's founder and CEO, and it is such a pleasure to have everybody on the call today.
Thanks for being here, Max. So when we think about our voice of the customer problems that we're facing with today, we're going to talk about the fact that people are increasingly inundated in getting requests for feedback. Ironically, the feedback that we want the most in many of our programs are those hard to reach decision makers. And these are the guys that frankly get the most requests for their time and thus have grown the most immune to most of them. You guys have probably all seen a cycle like this when you think about your own customer experience feedback programs. A lot of companies talk about diagrams like this, so we won't spend a lot of time on this. But really, when you think about what this is about, where you go out and you gather your event data, you engage your audience with an invitation of some type, you receive the feedback from them, you share that information out to your frontliners, share some information out to your decision makers, drive some improvement, and then go back and remeasure. This is a familiar cycle to many of us and how we've designed many programs together.
Yeah, I think our friends at Metrics and some of the other companies have that big circle, little version, circle version of it too, but these are very familiar themes, aren't they?
Absolutely. Let's go to the next slide and really talk about where we're going to focus in today. So today, when we think about the opportunity here, it really is around the beginning of that cycle where we're working to gather event data, and then how do we go out and engage our audience? When you think about it, a lot of us have no real problem gathering event data, but the problem seems to break down pretty dramatically when we go out with our invitations to drive acceptance of our invitation. So we'll talk about today, how do we really drive engagement at that point of acceptance?
And Mark, I think the thing that we want people to know about today is not just in general, but when you looked at that kind of title of our webinar today, we're really focused on these kind of decision makers, not a consumer feedback system, but rather thinking about senior decision makers, that hardest to reach group. This is always a hard cycle, but when you look at what's happening right now in the world of feedback, this breaks right here. As soon as you're talking about senior decision makers, that hardest group, a lot of times B2B feedback, it's really getting increasingly hard to get past this point, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah, it sure is. Do you have a sense of what's really going on out there, Max, in terms of the numbers?
We do, and they're not good. I mean, let's take a big kind of overarching view on this thing. Let me give you a couple of points from the recent GMA research study on survey fatigue. And guys, this is important information to know. If you're in our industry, this is an important thing to know. Just in general, when you look at the consumer world, in 2012, about 46% of people were asked for feedback more than 5 times per week. And again, we're not talking about senior decision makers, executives, high ticket items, things like that. We're just talking about the world, the general population. But by the time you got to 2016, that number had climbed to 80%. So 80% of people got requests for feedback over 5 times a week.
When you're looking at this chart, there's another interesting dynamic that I see happening here. The biggest increase seems to be over the last year. The people that are being asked the most often, people are being asked for invitations somewhere between 11 and 50 times a week. Just imagine that, 50 times per week getting requests to take a survey. That's the biggest invitation gap year over year.
That is a lot. Oh my God.
That's
a ton. You think about in the general world of getting feedback, that is a lot, and that explains why it's getting harder and harder to get responses. But that really explains why the group of people we're focused on today, for our purposes of our discussion, these senior decision makers, people who are the hardest people to get to respond for feedback, you can understand why they're becoming even more reluctant.
Here we have a title here. What is LvHV feedback, Max?
Yeah, I think a lot of people who are a lot of people have heard this term. We coined it years and years ago. LvHV feedback refers to something called low volume, high value. So when you think about feedback initiatives in general, whether you're, you can call them, you can look at these things generally, whether you're getting research information or voice of the customer, you're usually following a model designed for the consumer world, which is to say you got a large audience. And they're frequently interacting with your business in many, you call them smaller investment transactions, right? LvHV initiatives focus on smaller groups of stakeholders, but each of those, boy, is very important. So if you're a chain of retail or restaurants or something, and people interact with you every week in a relatively small transaction, you got a lot of swings at the ball, you got a lot of times at bat, and that transaction happens lots of little times. But what if you sell a very expensive IT product or something, and your customer is the vice president of technology purchasing or something? My friend, that is an LvHV initiative right there. That person, you're going to have very few interactions with that person. You have very few of that type of customer out there. It's a much smaller universe, but boy, are they important. And they require a completely different approach. That's where we're going with this today, which is that LvHV feedback requires a much more tailored approach. You have to have a higher success rate. This has got to work. They've really got to engage to give you this feedback. You can't afford not to, because there's just very little margin for error.
Max, it's interesting you talk about that. I've had so many conversations with really traditional market researchers who talk about things like statistical significance and roll-ups and looking at data in aggregates and sampling and quotas. And I contend that with this audience in particular, I'll make a point here and now and make it as loudly as I can, that there are no throwaway customers. Every customer, every piece of feedback, even in quantity of one, is so valuable to the overall customer experience and retaining and growing that customer, that we can't lose sight of the fact that every single piece of feedback, especially in this market, matters like gold.
I completely agree with you. There are no throwaway experiences. Let's look at some of what are you going to look for? When you see an LvHV initiative, what are you going to look for? Well, the first is, it's not a one-shot survey, but rather it should be framed so that there's an expectation of ongoing listening. An LvHV initiative that's successful, that works, should be highly designed and highly personalized. We're going to talk about that. I think this is important. It should be multi-format, multi-channel, but mono voice. People need to feel like they're having part of a cohesive experience, even though they may interact with you using different types of technology, different channels. It can't feel like you have different parts of your organization firing surveys at this poor, very important person, or it'll feel disjointed and you'll look bad and they won't engage. Another hallmark of LvHV initiatives are that there is a much bigger investment of effort at the initial engagement phase, including things that aren't digital. And lastly, there's a very different tone than consumer surveys. If you found yourself on a bike ride with the CEO of your most important client, you would not speak in the same way as you would normally. You'd have a much more candid discussion, a kind of insider feeling discussion among peers. And these types of surveys need to have that type of voice. And Mark, look at the outcomes that you want to have. A good LvHV initiative, you're going to have a few different outcomes that you need to have. You need to have a very high response rate over time. The idea of getting 2, 3, 5, even 10% is just way out of line. You need to have a very much higher 40, 50% at least engagement rate. You want very thoughtful participation. Not just click the bubbles, very thoughtful participation. And the customer, for having done this, should feel increased emotional investment in your company and your brand.
Sure.
So Mark, let's talk a little bit about this. Kind of, give us some ideas about the keys to making this work. When you deploy this among Customerville clients out there in the world, what are some of the keys that make it work?
Sure, there's probably 3 big ones that come to mind. So we'll talk about each of them over the next few minutes. The first one, guys, is we really want to think about how do you humanize the technology and how do you humanize the experience of the process. This isn't really about sharing feedback with a piece of software. It's almost like you're sharing important feedback with a peer, and we'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes. We also want to look at the way we reach out and engage this hard to reach audience. And we really want to think about how do you personalize and how do you calibrate that engagement process to make sure it doesn't fall simply on deaf ears. We'll talk more about that. And then finally, towards the latter part of this call, we'll talk about creating value back, or the answer to the question of what's in it for me to be able to participate in your program. And we'll dig into each of these over the next few minutes. So let's start with the first one. Again, the idea of humanizing the experience. You know, it's unfortunate that, you know, we talk about this being a survey. While factually it is, there's probably much more to it than that. And what we really wanted to talk about today is changing the mindset from a very traditional, you know, punch list survey data collection exercise to something much more and much more, frankly, close to the person that you want to go have that conversation with. It's really an interesting situation when you stop and think about it, because coming forward with kind of a one-size-fits-all experience that doesn't interest me is going to simply get ignored. It's also, we want to make sure that we're thinking about not thinking of the technology that we use to do this outreach as just a shortcut. It's really not. You know, sure, we could just, you know, pick up the phone and call these people since the audience is often small, but as Max said, very important. But we really want to be everywhere that we need to be. And that really means everywhere where these high value people are, at the appropriate time, in the appropriate medium, in the appropriate mindset.
Yeah, Mark, you have a neat way of putting it. You say that the technology allows us to use the magic of the web, and it really is. If you look at, you know, so many of our other related industries, there's some magic to this. If you add technology and some really great design and creativity, you can make this great and an experience in and of itself, can't you?
Absolutely. And it's a shame that people don't often think that way. And they're so busy when they think about their surveys, just replicating a bland piece of paper.
Somebody else's bad survey.
Yeah, missing out on the opportunity.
Right.
So who's this guy, Max?
This guy's interesting. He's Ray Brewer. Ray is the company historian at Xerox. We've actually got a neat piece of research we're doing right now where we're interviewing companies that have historians. I'll tell you why we have him here. One thing that I think is very important to keep in mind in general with surveys, and we certainly ascribe to this belief, but it's very true with low volume, high value, with LvHV surveys. When you're dealing with a small group of senior decision makers, especially in B2B, guys, people don't give feedback to companies. They don't give feedback to brand. They don't have conversations with forms. They do all of those things with people. And so it's very important that you have what we call an interlocutor who sits between you, between your brand and your customer, and someone so they feel like they're involved in something important and like they're dealing with people. And a good option, this is just one idea, you can use lots of different people for this, but a good option could be someone positioned as a cultural custodian. For instance, a company historian. One example of this, and we'll talk a little bit towards the end of the call about this, but if you can position your feedback initiative as a project where you are endeavoring to get, you're saying, oh, we're a company with years and years of history, and look at all the things we've done, but we're very focused on the next 50 years. And so we're talking to our most important customers in a landmark project where we're getting deep feedback that's read at the highest levels and thought about at the highest levels. Number one, that adds a level of intimacy to all of the surveys that follow that this person will kind of present, but really it also, and you know, kind of adds a little bit of ego to it. It strokes this person's ego where they feel like, hey, I'm not just filling out a survey, I'm participating in something that's important to a company with many thousands of employees and that touches people's lives. It's important to do that. This is one of the ways we're talking about investing on the front end of this, you know, in positioning your LvHV feedback initiative in this way, giving it a feeling of something more than a survey. And we talked a little bit about this earlier too. The initial invitation, you know, speaking of kind of humanizing this, think about how humans get feedback, right? If you've ever sold anything, or you've ever been a consultant, or you've ever done anything like that, you know, one of the golden rules is add value, give value, you know, invest in a relationship long before you try and get value back, right? So rather than think about, well, I'm going to send an email to this person, ask them to complete a survey. Position your initiative well, whether you're using a company historian or a long-serving employee or other customers to kind of frame the debate and give some life to this thing. When you reach out for the first time, you shouldn't be asking them to complete a survey. You should be selling them on the idea of giving this very important, very exclusive feedback. And frankly, we even think that first feedback, you might not want to do that digitally. Send them a wooden box or send them a silk lined invitation or something hand signed by your CEO or something like that, or by you. It says, hey, listen, this is a very important initiative and we'd like to ask your permission to ask for feedback about some very important things, over the next year in little bits and pieces. And we think we'll raise your eyebrows. We'll think it'll impress you with how we do it. This is very important. Those are the types of things that are going to get when you have this very high value, very low volume audience you need feedback from, that's how you're going to get that done.
It reminds me, Max, of an interesting story that years ago I had the opportunity to do some work with a company that was trying to reach their customers similarly to what you're talking about here. And we worked with them to try to change the engagement process from what would have been originally designed to be a simple, at the time, letter that they dropped in the mail inviting participation. We said, let's go three-dimensional. And one of the three-dimensional things that we did is we went out because we wanted to tell a story about how that particular company was able to drive better insight for the people doing work with them. We decided to go out and we went and bought a bunch of binoculars. We literally bought almost 1,000 pairs of binoculars from a vendor. And each person we wanted to have this type of engagement with, we mailed them a pair of binoculars along with a letter. And that letter talked about, in the time, seeing the forest for the trees. And it was an interesting exercise because we had them call each and every recipient of the binoculars that we mailed out. And if I tell you, we mailed out 750 binoculars and had about 600 people distinctly remember and thank us for them and were very willing to engage with us going forward. Well, frankly, we became the binocular people, but at the time, it got to the point where it got their attention, and it won us the opportunity to engage these leaders that would otherwise have been better.
I bet it did. I bet it was very successful.
It was terrific. Max, when you think about now personalization, could you give some specifics about how do you really leverage that, whether it be in terms of how we invite or how we engage people?
I think this is a good transition point. So we talk about this idea of investing on the front end to position this initiative, at a higher level than the survey, making sure that we really engage with these people. But then the survey, the next kind of level of investment is making sure that we really train the survey to reach out at key times over the year and personalize that by recipient. That happens through very thoughtful data integration to look at what sources of data we have that can help us know those things and make sure we're asking at the right times. This is not the same as saying the first week of each quarter we send a survey out. That is not what this is. You have to hit a higher level of personalization to do that. We want to invite people for feedback in a variety of ways with a consistent and human message, and we're going to show you that in a sec. Coming up in a couple of slides, we'll show you some really cool examples. And on accepting the invitation right out of the gate, we want your customer to have an always unique experience that's very personalized. They should say, how the heck did these guys do that? How do they make this work? That's one of the things you want to do, and it's a key to keeping them kind of engaged with you and giving you feedback over their lifetime. So let me give you some examples around this. This is just sort of a general look at this about reaching out over time. What we want to see in any LvHV initiative where you've got very low volume, very high value group of people you need to get feedback from, start by looking at the year. And this could be all kinds of things. We deal with clients where they're senior executives we're trying to get feedback from because they're decision makers. We get feedback from people who are celebrities, dealing with a talent agent or an elite performer or something like that. Very high value retail customers, things like that. You start by looking at their year. And examples of things you might look at are their quarterly planning cycles, product launch dates, yours or theirs, life events. Think about life insurance companies, financial planning companies, all kinds of things that about this customer think about your life, and I want to really get you thinking about two things: the tactical timing and strategic timing. Tactical timing is saying, "Hey, the guy just got off an airplane. Let's figure out right now how to get a survey in his hand, so he can tell him. We can tell us how that went." Strategic timing is this is a senior executive who probably works 60 hours a week. When should we be reaching out to him? When are his quiet and introspective times? If you want to get a hold of that guy in the real world, you're probably most likely to do that Friday at 6 p.m. He's at the office, or Saturday morning. He's probably working. If you think about the times when she is going to be, away from other distractions and able to be thoughtful, early in the morning on the exercise bike is not a bad time. And then think about the different types of feedback interactions. As you plan this out over the year and you automate this, your different audience members are going to get these interactions in different ways. It might be an SMS free text response. It might be what we call a story survey. It might be a gesture survey, and we'll show you some examples of these. But what I want to connect with you on, guys, is this idea that everybody's getting something tailored to them. And that each of these things, whenever we're reaching out to them, they should feel like it's part of the same project, part of the same initiative, it's of a piece. It should be interesting for them to share feedback. This is interesting, and we'll just give you some examples. We sat down and brainstormed, what are different times you might, think of all the different types of clients we deal with, different type, where you're looking at a really low volume, high value group of people. When are times when we might want to be saying, hey, we'd like some feedback, right? We'd like to talk to you right now. Think of yourself as being kind of the quiet companion. If we could make you like a ghost following this person through their life, and you could pick certain times to say, hey, how's it going right now? Think about those times, because if you're really thoughtful and you leverage the data integration on the back end, you can actually replicate some of that. When are the times? On the Friday night plane back home. That's a great time, right? On the exercise bike at 6 a.m. Thinking about some of our clients, their stakeholders might have a big day where they won something and are celebrating, or they lost and they're regrouping. Those are times to get feedback. An important career anniversary, Saturday morning catch-up time at the office. You can imagine a client where the moment where you put down earnest money on a car or a home or something like that is a big moment. Maybe your daughter just graduated from college. I mean, these are all, you can see this kind of confluence of personal moments and professional moments in this person's life. And if you're thoughtful, you can make sure that you're there to ask in the right way at these types of moments.
Max, is an interesting thing. If you look at the 8 of these things that you have as examples on the screen now, all of them have one thing in common with each other, and that is they're all about the person you're looking for feedback from.
They are.
None of them are about you as the company asking for it. So my point here is that if you're able to focus on them and get them talking about them, you will win. If this becomes more about you and your brand and your company, it's not going to be quite so easy.
That's right. That's exactly. But this is these are the same things that you find of any healthy human conversation, right? You can get this great information, but you don't need to have it be me, right? It's really about how I, intersect with you. I just think it's a great point, Mark. That's a great point. Let's show some examples here.
That's great.
Yeah. So we're showing you a couple of examples, and I just want to give you a sense of how you can imagine where we might, integrate with systems on the back end to make sure we're asking at the right time. Not every interaction is the same. They might be a quick response survey. They might be an interactive story survey. Over the course of the year, these things are going to come at this person. They're going to be different, right? So here's an example where, look at how frank this is, right? You can imagine you're an executive in a company and you buy some product from Lenovo, right? Well, imagine what would happen if you get this text from David Roman saying, hey, look, and I want this thing coming at Saturday morning at 10. I know you're working. I know you're thinking about work. Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, hey, David Roman sends you saying, look, we partner, good morning. I might even have the designer say, good morning. It's Saturday morning. I know you're probably working. We partnered with your company, but we also want to be a good partner to you throughout your career. Are we good for your career? Ask that kind of stuff. You might not ask that of everybody, but this guy you want to know, right?
That's
I
great.
love this one. This is a great example. Guys, think about this. Imagine you run an airline. You're talking about your most important business class people. I was on a flight the other evening coming back. It was Friday night. Everybody on this call has been in this situation. Friday night, 7 o'clock. Coming back home. The plane is landing. I've been on the road all week. Busting ass, and like I'm tired. Every sane person is already home with their family, and I'm just landing. And this flight attendant in business class was absolutely amazing. If I'm being honest, gave me an extra cocktail, made sure I had everything I need. As I got up, put my suit jacket on. I mean, noticed there was some schmutz on my shoulder and like wiped it off for me. Then he stepped out of the plane with my bag, and as I stepped out, he handed it to me, shook my hand, and gave me a big smile and said, way to finish strong. Great week. Way to finish strong. I walked off that thing with a spring in my step. I felt great. Like these guys were in my corner. But we've had those experiences. You've also had the experience where you were Friday night coming home, and a couple of grumpy flight attendants gossiped together and didn't really appear to put an effort in, and you felt like you were on a Greyhound. If you are running business class or you're running global services for some great airline like our friends at United, you want to make sure that your guys are having the right kind of experience, that they feel like, hey, these guys are in my corner. This is exactly how you do that. You'd say, it's 9:30. You get off that flight, you're headed to your car. It's 9:30 p.m. How was your flight in? It's Friday night. Welcome home. Did we finish strong with you? That is something that you could imagine only going to that type of customer, this very valuable customer, only when they are Friday nights coming home to their home city destination. I think the designer wasn't happy just giving us one. They might say, we probably know this is a man or a woman, right? Let's look at some different art we could put in there. One of our colleagues, a friend of ours, had dreamed of buying, I don't think he bought a Ferrari, but he bought a very, very nice car, and he dreamed about it since he was a kid. And he showed up and he put his he put the deposit down, slaps down his Amex card and puts his deposit down. And he couldn't believe it. This is kind of a life event for him, right? And immediately he gets this terrible survey that looks like he's filling out his taxes in the Soviet Union or something. It was just such a buzzkill for him. And then he took delivery of the car, and that was a real high, right? And then immediately he gets this terrible survey, the same survey. It was like they didn't even hear him a second time. And then later something actually went wrong with the car. He had to bring it in and get it serviced. Same survey. And he said it was the disconnect there was terrible. You can't, in this type of environment, you really never want to miss an opportunity to engage at the moment and work with the emotion. Don't work against it. So you can imagine in this case, somebody buys a car and let's say you go out and you buy yourself a Ferrari. You saved your whole life for it, right? And I want the Sergio Marchione's text to come through saying, hey, I remember when I put my Amex card down and made that deposit, and I felt amazed. How do you feel? The only critique I'd have of this is it like some maybe nervous or something. It's like not all necessarily positive emotions there, but let's have this person give us a couple of choices, and let's have a couple of them acknowledge you might be nervous about this. This is another great example, and just to kind of wrap it up, which is, a great example of how these things need to be human and legitimate and authentic. This is Miramax Pharmaceuticals. They're just a remarkable company with a remarkable cancer treatment. But treating cancer is very hard, and so you can see, again, this is an example of where we want to know when that doctor's, hopefully at some point when they're even doing their rounds or something like that, but you're going to ask this person, an oncologist, to give feedback. One of the things you notice is how real the art is. You're showing a doctor at the end of the day very, very tired, right? This is an interactive survey. It does some cool stuff. I think we covered that on one of our other coffee break webinars. But the idea that this has to hit at the highest creative level to really get this person, in this case an oncologist, to take time out of their day to tell us how we went.
That's fantastic.
All right, Mark. So I guess, thinking about all of these three things, the thing that kind of brings it together is this idea of offering value back. Tell us what that means, and kind of tell us also what it doesn't mean.
That's a great question. So let's really start off, guys, with what it doesn't mean. This is not about gift cards and iPads to get people to participate. When you're thinking about this audience, the last thing that they need is yet another iPad, or frankly, a gift card to perhaps a mediocre restaurant, a chain restaurant in the area. What they really want is to feel like they're doing something bigger than themselves, that this is an opportunity for them to contribute, to yourselves, to the brand, to the industry, and frankly, to their own legacy. And the ability to really get them to feel strongly engaged that this is a mission that we're on together with them, and they could help shape our future as we help them shape their future.
That's a great point.
If you take a look at the next slide, sometimes this isn't even about a gift at all, but maybe it's just about an expression of transparency. Maybe they really want to feel like they're part of a community of like-minded people, and they have, by sharing feedback with you, you'll share feedback back with them. And the whole idea here is that you have the ability to make them feel like they're belonging to a very elite group. And in doing so, you have to be willing, as the organization behind it, to take that leap of faith and open the kimono and say, let's share with you openly and transparently what we're hearing, both good and bad. And I think that level of transparency will drive much greater appreciation from the people that you're looking to ask that feedback from.
I heard you call that radical transparency the other day. I like that term.
But it's really hard. It's really hard for some companies to open up that much, but it's so important that you try.
Yeah, get moving in that direction.
Yep.
I like what you talk about, legacy. Speaking of legacy, is a good picture for somebody.
Here's good old Bill. And sometimes when we're thinking about the what's in it for me as the person you want that feedback from, maybe it's just something as simple as gratifying ego. A lot of people in high leadership roles do have an ego, and the ability to reach out to them in ways that make them feel appreciated and even a little bit stroked will cause them to want to engage. In this case, it's a free thing. It doesn't cost $1 to say something really appreciative to them and make them feel warmly appreciated and valued back.
I was in a meeting the other day where this came up, Mark, and they said, instead of sending a gift card to TGIF or something, don't do that. Don't promise it at the end of the survey, but spontaneously, 6 months into this, send a note saying, we made a donation in your name to a charity where we buy, you buy a goat or a farm animal for a family in a developing country, and you're investing in their future. And we say, thank you for investing in our future. We thought we'd make a donation in your name. Investing in someone else's future is our way of saying. So you can just position it in a different way, but feed this idea of legacy. I love that idea.
That's a great point. I just really wanted to, if you have one more moment here, just to invite you to share back with us. Feel free to reach out and talk to Max and me and our team. Here's our email. Here's my direct phone number, as well as visit customerville.com. There's a ton of great customer experience content in our pro resources section. It's all free and wide open for you to take and enjoy and share with your colleagues. It's a great site full of really thoughtful information, as well as other webinars that we've done in the recent past. So with that, I really wanted to wrap up on behalf of Max and me, just to really say thank you very much for the time you gave us today, and we'll see you next month for the November Coffee Break webinar. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.